A tugboat navigator and her crew outran a typhoon at sea and discovered an alien life form that had taken over a Russian research vessel. The movie begins on a Russian research vessel called Akademik Vladislav Volkov, located in the South Pacific. The Russian research vessel was communicating with space station Mir when the cosmonauts and Mir saw a surge of purple energy heading towards them. The purple energy hit the space station and killed everyone in it. Akademik Vladislav Volkov lost all audio visuals of the Mir, and they tried communicating with the cosmonauts again. A video communication with Mir showed them a glimpse of what was happening to the space station when the purple energy sent an electric beam down the research vessel. 7 days later, a tugboat called Sea Star is stuck in the ocean while a typhoon called Leah is raging. Tugboat navigator and ex-Navy officer Kelly Foster warned Robert Everton, the alcoholic captain of the tugboat, that the barge was taking on water. But Robert told her it was fine, as the tugboat supposedly can take a lot worse than the situation it was in at that moment. Sea Star was then hit by a green wave, a particularly large wave that overtook the boat, which severely damaged the boat. Water started filling the boat up, and the crew rushed to the engine room, but was unable to get in due to the jammed door. The barge was also receiving a lot of damage because of the water, and the boat's engineer, Steve Baker, suggested cutting it loose because if the barge goes down, they go down with it. However, the captain was ignorant and refused to let go of their uninsured cargo. Steve wanted to cut the barge loose with or without the captain's permission, but Robert pulled out a gun and threatened Steve with it. A large wave caused the barge to start sinking, and the chain connecting it to Sea Star snapped. Losing the barge means no more weight holding them back, and the crew managed to outrun Typhoon Leah. The next day, the sea was already calm, but the damage to the tugboat had already been done. The next tried to repair the boat as much as they could, but the damage was so bad that it's only a matter of time before Sea Star completely sinks. They tried to send a signal of distress, but no one was answering. Their radar then picked up a contact. A big ship is dead in the water, and Kelly tried communicating with the ship, but no one was answering. Richie looked around and noticed that their captain wasn't there. Robert was in his cabin, so distressed at the state of his boat and the loss of his precious cargo that he was ready to just end it all. Before he could pull the trigger, Squeaky knocked on the door and informed him about the ship they had detected. Robert went to the deck to see the ship they were approaching when they found debris floating on the water. It was foggy and they couldn't see much, but they knew that the debris didn't come from their boat. Leaving the foggy area, they found the ship, which was actually the Akademik Vladislav Volkov. They observed it and noticed how it looked abandoned. Kelly recognized the ship as a Russian vessel and got a book that gave her information about it. Using a megaphone, Robert tried calling for the attention of the vessel's crew, but they received no response. Robert commanded Steve to break out the shotguns, the flashlights, and the walkies, and they climbed aboard the Russian research vessel. They cautiously searched around the ship, looking for any clue as to what happened and why there seemed to be no one on such a huge ship. They saw a cracked window, and it was a mess inside the steering station. There was also blood splattered on the wall. Woods, who stayed on the Sea Star with deckhand Hiko, asked if they saw anything, and Robert just gave him a vague answer as he commanded Richie to check the radios, which were smashed. The crew, excluding Kelly, Hiko, and Woods, cheered when they all thought of salvaging the ship. Robert suggested towing the ship to safety and putting a salvage lien on it so the Russian government would pay them. Richie, Steve, and Squeaky started guessing how much they would receive if they got paid, and they were delightfully surprised when Robert answered that they would get $300 million if they played their cards right. Robert instructed Steve and Squeaky to find the ship's generator and see if they could get the main engines running. Richie is to throw a line down to the tug while Kelly tries to get some of the ship's navigational equipment started. Kelly told Robert that she knew about the maritime law, and if they see anyone still alive on the ship, they can't claim it. She was appalled when Robert told her that he hoped they didn't find anyone alive then. Woods steered the tugboat closer to the vessel, while the rest of the crew did as they were instructed. While looking for the generator, Steve expressed his worry to Squeaky. It was strange for him that a Russian vessel was abandoned in the middle of nowhere. Aside from that, they were also talking about a huge sum of money and there was no one in the crew they could trust but themselves. They finally found the generator, and the power to the ship was restored. But the moment that the engine started running, the ship's robotics started moving on their own, and a loud screech was heard. Richie threw a rope down the tugboat, and deckhand Hiko attached it to Seastar. Kelly was using one of the ship's computers, and she realized that someone seemed to be running it, which was odd as she believed no one was there with them. The anchor started dropping on its own, hitting Seastar on its way. Richie tried to stop the anchor from dropping, but it was too late as the whole anchor had dropped down on Seastar and the tugboat started sinking with Hiko and Woods in it. Woods swam to the vessel while Steve dove down to save Hiko, who didn't know how to swim. Squeaky was left alone in the engine room, and he commented on how the whole ship is automated. Steve disagreed with what he said and alerted him that there was somebody else on the board who sank Seastar. Steve, Kelly, and Robert took Hiko to the sickbay, where Kelly treated his injury as best as she could. On the other hand, Richie and Woods were told to go to the engine room to serve as Squeaky's backups. But instead of going straight to the engine room, Richie and Woods wandered around and checked different rooms in the ship. Meanwhile, Squeaky was waiting for Richie and Woods when he noticed a movement from the corner of his eye. He checked what it was, not knowing that it was a spider-like robot luring him. The wires wrapped themselves around Squeaky's neck, and he was pulled to his death. Richie and Woods entered a dark room containing missiles when Richie found blood splattered on the wall and ground. Kelly, Steve, Robert, and Hiko were still at the sickbay, chatting with no care in the world, when Steve noticed something odd about the CCTV camera. Unexpectedly, a masked person came out of hiding and shot at the Seastar crew. Steve knocked the masked person out with a shotgun and took off the mask to see that it was a Russian woman. The Russian woman is Nadia Vinogradova, a crew member at Academic Vladislav Volkov. Steve called Squeaky, but he wasn't answering, so he called Richie and Woods and asked them where they were. Richie and Woods were still wandering out when Steve called and told them to go to the engine room as soon as possible, as Squeaky wasn't answering. Steve grabbed his gun and decided to go to the engine room too, leaving Kelly, Robert, and Hiko at the sickbay with Nadia. When the Russian woman woke up, she was in panic and insisting on turning off the power because it needs power to move through the ship. Robert asked what the it was that Nadia was talking about. Nadia responded that it came from the Mir space station and killed everyone. Nadia was obviously traumatized by whatever happened in the vessel. But Robert merely judged her strange words and state as having a mental disability. Nadia suddenly took off running and grabbed an axe on her way. Kelly chased after her and got her cornered. To gain Nadia's trust, Kelly introduced herself and gently asked the still-shaken woman about what happened. Kelly was still unable to believe that 300 crew members of a Russian research vessel were gone. Nadia explained that 8 days ago, something came onto the ship during a transmission from the Mir space station. It took control of computers, scanned all information, language, encyclopedias, and medical data, and pretty much learned how to kill them. Nadia and the vessel captain, Alexei, were the only ones to survive, and the two of them cut their cables. Kelly was utterly confused. Nadia was describing the assailant as an it before changing to them, and Nadia clarified that they were going against machines. Nadia was even more confused, but before Nadia could elaborate, Robert and Hiko arrived. Kelly suggested bringing Nadia to the bridge, and Hiko tied Nadia up before taking her. Meanwhile, Richie and Woods saw a blueprint on the wall that they couldn't understand as it was in Russian. Suddenly, a fly-like robot came alive, scaring the two Seastar crew members, and Richie destroyed it. The next day, they stumbled upon an automated workshop where the machines seemed to be producing more robots. Despite the fact that they were attacked by one of those weird robots, Richie was still amazed at the sight before him, while Woods was disturbed. Seeing the strange movements of a machine behind him, Woods tried to convince Richie to leave. However, Richie was still busy with a spider-like robot who shot them with nails. Woods was hit, and a robot behind Richie started drilling into his back. Richie turned around and destroyed the robot. A silhouette of a man was then seen, and he started unloading a gun on the whole room. Richie and Woods fired back and scrambled out of the room. Richie alerted Steve about the man, whom they presumed was another crew member, and Steve told him to hurry up to the engine room. Steve reached the engine room, but he saw that the door to the engine room had been welded shut and no one was inside it when he peeked. Richie and Woods arrived minutes later and told him what happened in the automated workshop. The Russian man appeared again, and it turned out that the man was actually a cyborg. Steve, Richie, and Woods took cover as the Russian cyborg unloaded his gun at them once again. The 3 Sea Star crew members waited for the right timing before fighting back against the Russian cyborg. The others are at the steering station where Nadia is restrained. Kelly had already told Robert and Hiko what Nadia told her, and none of the two believed the story. Robert threatened Nadia with his gun and demanded to know where Squeaky was, believing that Nadia had something to do with his disappearance. Kelly stood in between Nadia and the gun to stop Robert from doing something stupid when Steve, Richie, and Woods came in with the Russian cyborg they had brought down with the munitions they had salvaged from the ship's weapons storage room. Nadia tensed at the sight of her late captain, who had been turned into a cyborg. Kelly asked Nadia to continue her story, and Nadia did. The beam that hit the ship took control of the whole ship and built robots, starting with the little ones called gatherers and then cyborgs. More crew members died. Some were converted into cyborgs, and the rest escaped to the sea. Nadia and Alexei, who was also her husband, were the only ones to stay behind. The only way for them to kill these alien robots is to cut their source of power. Richie examined the cyborg, noting how blood was still pumping through Alexei's still-alive brain and that there's some kind of self-contained power supply inside it. Cyborg Alexei suddenly grabbed Nadia's arm, and Hiko destroyed its arm. Robert still refused to believe that there's an alien inside the ship and is convinced that it was just something that the Russian government had cooked up. The storm resumed, and Robert tried to steer it into the wind, but the steering wheel wasn't working, so they had to steer the ship in the engine room. Cyborg Alexei came alive again, and Richie was shot in the head. The crew and Nadia headed to the engine room when they felt that the ship had turned 20 degrees into the wind. They continued walking when they heard a crash from the other side of the door. Recognizing the man on the other side as Squeaky, Steve opened the door against everyone's will and discovered that Squeaky had been converted into a cyborg. Behind him is a much bigger cyborg who then killed Woods. The rest of the crew and Nadia entered the communications room and barricaded the door. Nadia told them that they destroyed every transmitter on the ship, and she panicked when Richie fixed a transmitter and tried to send a distress signal. Robert destroyed the transmitter and warned everyone that no one else could claim the vessel but them. Having had enough of his greed, Kelly punched him in the gut and told him that he was no longer in charge before cutting the wire and tying Nadia's hands up. The cyborg started banging on the door, and Richie used the computer to ask the alien who it was. Then a computerized voice answered that it was aware. The alien thinks that humans are viruses that are very destructive. The alien then listed down parts of an optic nerve, and they realized that it wanted to use them as spare parts. They needed to find a way to destroy the alien, and since it's electrical like lightning, Hiko suggested using the water to ground it out and kill the lightning. They had to go to the D-deck to get to the mainframe. Squeaky broke through the door, and Richie unloaded his gun at his cyborg friend before destroying a wall to get out of the room. While everyone else left, Robert stayed behind and communicated with the alien, offering to bring the alien anywhere it wanted, and the latter told him to go to Workroom 14. Reaching Workroom 14, the alien requested that Robert help them survive. The group, minus Richie, had reached D-deck but discovered that the mainframe computer was gone. Richie, on the other hand, had strayed from the group. The fear of being turned into a robot murderer sent him into panic, and he was making plans on his own. The group found themselves trapped and surrounded by cyborgs. They climbed up a ladder and headed to the antenna control room. Climbing another ladder, Kelly was the last to go, and she got swept by the water. Hiko saved her, but fell into the ocean himself. In the antenna control room, they discovered that the ship was heading to Lord Howe Island, where a British intelligence station is located. The station has digital link-ups to all the military and commercial satellites in the Southern Hemisphere, and if the alien gets into the transoceanic Pacific cable, it could go anywhere. They suddenly heard a voice over the radio coming from the vessel Norfolk, who had received their distress signal. The man on the radio told them to respond by signal flare, but the group knew that they couldn't let vessel Norfolk near vessel Volkov, as the alien might infest it too, so they decided to sink vessel Volkov. Cyborg Robert suddenly came into the room, but unlike the other cyborgs, Robert still has a mind of his own. While Steve and Kelly were keeping Robert distracted, Nadia lit up a grenade and attached it to Robert. Steve pushed Robert out of the room before Robert exploded. Kelly, Nadia, and Steve left the room and stumbled upon Richie, who refused to come with them. Kelly, Nadia, and Steve emptied the ship's fuel tanks and planted bombs everywhere. However, a large cyborg broke into the room, and Steve pushed Kelly out of the way, causing her to drop her walkie-talkie. The cyborg attacked the pipes they were hiding from, and both Steve and Nadia were rendered unconscious, while Kelly fell into a pool of fuel. The cyborg went after Kelly and captured her. When Kelly regained consciousness, she found herself hanging in front of the alien form, who demanded to know where the detonator was. Steve, Nadia, and Richie came to save Kelly, and Richie's missile was able to subdue the alien form for a while so Nadia could get Kelly down. The alien form sent metal beams down Richie and Steve, the former getting impaled with a metal that killed him, and Nadia assisted Kelly as they escaped from the alien who was in pursuit of them. The ladies put on survival suits, and Kelly followed after Nadia when they got cornered by the alien form. Nadia instructed Kelly to get to the upper deck and get off the ship so she could tell people what happened to the vessel Volkov. Pushing Kelly away, Nadia sacrificed herself by letting the alien form grab her and shooting nearby gas tanks with a flare gun. Unfortunately, the alien form received damage but survived nonetheless. Kelly bumped into Steve and they rushed to the missile bay, where the ejection seats that Richie had prepared beforehand were. The launching of the ejection seat triggered the series of pin grenades that Richie had also set up, and the explosion of the grenades was followed by the explosions of the missile bomb, sinking Volkov in the sentient electricity was destroyed alongside the ship. The explosion was seen by the vessel Norfolk. Regaining consciousness, Kelly found herself stranded in the ocean with both Steve and Hiko. Kelly was glad to see Hiko alive, but that gladness was replaced with fear when she discovered that Hiko was a cyborg. However, she realized it was just a dream, and she and Steve had been rescued.